Welcome to the Bernie's Bootlegs podcast, where we explore the stories of successful musicians and share their perspectives on being an artist in a digital age. I'm your host, Kenny McCabe, and let's get into the show. Okay, guys, I'm here with Mike DiRubbo. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Bernie, thanks so much.
It's my pleasure. How are you?
Pretty good, man. Yeah.
So yeah, man, what have you been up to? Tell us about any recent happenings. I'm sure you're playing a lot and all that. So tell us what's up for you.
Oh, man, just trying to stay busy like everyone and stay on this saxophone, this lifelong journey here. Recently, I had a little weekend at Smalls with George Coleman Jr. He's a drummer, son of the George Coleman, the saxophonist. And then we were in the studio on Sunday and Monday, and Big George played a couple of tunes with us on Monday, so I was, really cool to be next to him in the studio.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, that's got to be a treat, and I mean, it's great that he's still playing. Like, I hope that I'm still playing at that age. Like, that's awesome.
Oh my God, yeah, man. I mean, I've had, a lot of examples. Of course, unfortunately, Harold Mabern passed recently, and Larry Willis, two pianists that I've got to work with quite a bit in my career here in New York, and always looked up to them because they were just, kind of Iron Men and just kept doing it and never complained, and it was inspiring,
Absolutely. And so I'd love to give the audience a little bit of context about you, because I'd love for them to, get to hear your story, like where you're from and how you came to New York.
Well, I grew up not too far away up in New Haven, Connecticut. And as far as playing the saxophone, was something my dad kind of encouraged me to do. He was into the sound of it, and but the funny thing was that when I picked an instrument early on, they put me on the clarinet, so played that for like 4 years, and then Dad got me a sax when I was about 12, and I kind of taught myself how to play it from what I knew from the clarinet. So I used to play, I didn't know middle C was with the middle finger, so I used to play it like a like a low C with the octave key for a little while. But I really, I had a different upbringing than a lot of the younger generation these days, with all these jazz camps and blah, 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 and taking lessons with cats. And so I was like kind of on my own until I decided to go to school for music, and that's when I met Jackie McLean. And I was going to go to Berkeley, but then I had the audition with Jackie, and he really turned me on to going there at the Hart School up in Hartford. And the rest is kind of history, man. I just really put my head down and trying to get my stuff together, I mean, I lived in Connecticut still for a little while. I was playing a lot with Steve Davis, the trombonist. We had a group, and we kind of had like a steady gig up in Hartford, and we would rehearse and play originals and stuff. And we made one of Steve's recordings for Crisscross, one of the first ones back in '95, I think it was. And Eric Alexander was on that also, and trying to remember who else. I think it was Bruce Barth, Ugana Okegwo, and Eric McPherson. And then around that time, through Steve, I had gotten introduced to Joe Farnsworth and Jim Rotundi and these cats, and they were playing quite a bit at Augie's Uptown, which became Smoke Jazz Club now. So even when I wasn't living in New York, Joe was already starting to call me to come down and play with them on the weekends. And then I finally moved in '97. So I wasn't super young. I was like 27 when I moved here. And that was back in '97, and I've been here since.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
wondering
I'm
if you
wondering if
could.
you could.
Oh, sorry,
Oh, sorry,
my voice
my
is
voice is
echoing.
echoing.
Oh, is it? Shit. Here, I'll put the headphones on. I'll be vain and put that and won't be vain. Excuse me. Um, let's try that. Is that better?
Yes, there we go.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit about working with Jackie and your time at the Hart School because that school, in my mind, is special just in terms of the number of amazing musicians that have come out of there, both of like your generation and also the younger cats like Josh Evans, Jonathan Barber, like a lot of
Yeah.
folks. And so, well, maybe you can just tell us about your time at that institution and what Jackie was like.
I mean, I was there. I guess I can't hear myself through the phones, right? Or maybe I'm doing something wrong.
No,
Doesn't.
I think it's okay.
That's okay. Um, I was there from '88 to '92, so it's just quite a while ago, I guess, right? This is a different time, man. I mean, we didn't have computers and none of this stuff that we all take for granted. Not in cell phones, none. All that stuff was gone. It's almost hard to imagine like how we did it back, existed. I mean, if you wanted to get hear a record, we'd go to the library at the school and go check it out, sign it out. But um, being around Jackie, that was just he was like my universe at that time because I really didn't have any other teachers on saxophone before Jackie. Really, I had a couple of lessons here and there with some local guys, but Jackie was kind of the guy for me. And the cool thing was he would bring his saxophone to the saxophone class. We would have a group lesson early in the morning on Wednesdays, and it would be like in two parts. Like I want to say the older, like maybe the guys that had been there for a while would have the first one, and then freshmen would come in the second group later. And he'd always have like at least a piano player or a bass, if not a full rhythm section in there for us to play. And he would just give us little bits and pieces of the language, things to play over the blues and the rhythm changes, like little parts of the language, and give us things to do and people to transcribe. There's a lot of working on transcribing people, and we also had him for the history class, which was great. So he's given us the whole history of the music going back to Africa and the origins of man. Like the whole first semester was origins of man up to maybe like the big band period, and then second semester was bebop and into the modern stuff. But it was amazing, man, to hear it, to be in a room with a sound like that. You know what I mean? That's one of the really important things, I think, that maybe the younger generation misses out on a little bit. I mean, I'm not one of these guys that tries to say everything was better when I was younger. It's not, I mean, it's all, you know what I'm saying, that we're all working on it. But I think if you miss out if you can be near somebody with a sound like that, it's something you can't describe. You know what I mean? So that was super inspiring, man. And at that time, '88, '92, I mean, that Jackie had just come back out with that recording Dynasty with his son, and Hotep Coletta was a pianist. He was also one of our teachers at the school, and Nat Reeves, who I'm still very good friends with, an amazing bass player, still teaches up at the Jackie McLean Institute. And Carl Allen was in that band. So we would come down to the Vanguard because they would play there a couple of times a year and go hear them. And, we'd be working on this music too in school that Jackie was playing. So it was super inspiring, man. Yeah.
Yeah, man, no doubt. And so, what year was it that you moved to New York?
That was '97, man. I was a little late in the game, but like I said, I actually didn't finish my undergraduate until later, like until I was like 40. So I had like a few academic electives, that I hadn't finished up. But in my mind, I was kind of done, and I was already out there doing things. So I was doing some local gigs with my own little groups. Excuse me. And like I said earlier, with Steve Davis, we had a group together called the Explorers Quintet, and we would play a lot of original stuff. And we had a steady gig, so for a while it was kind of cool, you know. And cats would come through Hartford because we had another night up there at this club we played where we'd bring people up. So I got to play with a bunch of cats that way. And then I started doing the Augies thing, 94, 95. And then eventually, you always think you're going to like save up enough money to move to New York, but it just doesn't happen, man. So I just convinced a drummer friend of mine, Tony Leone, man. He's out there playing with a bunch of different kind of gigs now. But we got a place in Brooklyn, and then that was it, man. And I've been all over New York. Now I'm in Manhattan for the past 7 years or so. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And so I moved there in '97, and I'd love for you to give some context about what kind of the club scene was like. You mentioned Augie's, and I believe Smalls was open at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. How was it different than it is today?
I mean, it's like it's different and then it's the same, you know, because for all the places that close, there seem to be new little places that pop up. But the core places are still here and were back then. I mean, you had the Vanguard. You did have Sweet Basil, which became Sweet Rhythm. So that was kind of a drag when that went away. That was just a little further down on 7th Avenue. It became, I don't know, what it might be like a restaurant now. It was like a retail store for a while. That room, for me, had one of the best sounds to play in, man. I don't know what it was about that room, but it was pretty amazing. Got to play there with, it was David Hazeltine's group with Jimmy Cobb and David Williams on bass and myself and Jim Rotundi. So that was a weekend that I did with Jimmy Cobb there. Now, damn, and I thought I played with some good drummers, but Jesus, playing with Jimmy Cobb, that was like it was amazing, the sound coming from the drums. But Augie's became Smoke, and Smalls kind of changed up quite a bit because it was kind of a BYOB place before. And when you walk down into Smalls, the bar was on the left. It was just a different setup. It was kind of a different scene. But it's always been kind of an incubator down there in Smalls for cats trying stuff. And, you know the history, I'm sure, of all the different cats that have come up through there. Trying to think of any other places. I did get to go to a few of the older clubs that don't exist anymore, so I got to experience them a little bit. But I think the scene is still strong, man. The biggest difference, and I mean, New York is just different post 9/11 anyway. It just feels different. It's, the whole smoking thing in clubs was kind of, initially I was like, wow, they're really going to get people not to smoke. But then, I mean, I used to come home the next day after playing Augie's, and the next day take my horn out to practice, and it would just reek of cigarettes, man. And we were just breathing that stuff in, like never thinking about it. But what was my point? Now I forgot. Well, the whole point post 9/11, New York it's just earlier, man. Everything seems to be earlier now. And cats seem, I don't know, there's like a tendency towards people just being a little healthier, maybe, I want to say. Like, or maybe it's just my age group now. We think about these things. I'm 49, so it's not like I'm not like hanging super hard like I did when I first came here until the wee hours of the morning. Which, sometimes I'm like, man, I should do that a little bit more, just to be out there, but it's rough on your body as you get older, so. But the gigs were later, man, like when we played at Augie's, we didn't even start until 10, and we'd go till 4 in the morning, man, and that was the way it was on the weekends, and that doesn't exist anymore. You know, you're starting gigs at 7 o'clock now, which seems strange sometimes, you know.
Yeah, and so just in terms of your practicing and your own exploration of the instrument and the music, what are the main things that you've spent a lot of time doing? Is there anything in particular that you feel really helped you?
Oh man, I gotta keep going back to the shed, man. You know, it just it just keeps changing. One of the things at heart, we had to take a classical lesson too. So we had to study with. At the time I was there, was Kenneth Radnofsky. He's a great classical saxophonist. I think he still teaches in Boston at New England Conservatory and a couple other places. And at the time, I was like, man, why do I need to do this? Man, the classical saxophonists don't have to study with Jackie, you know. But you realize that if you're going to play the saxophone, you need to have your technique together to a certain extent. So I go back to a lot of those little etudes and things, and I found, you know, hundreds of others over the years, and it's always part of my practice to look at things like that. Um, but man, sound is very important. And that's something that you work on with your long tones and whatnot, and finding the correct setup. Um, I don't know if it's my generation. I don't know if it's just the way I hear the saxophone, but I like a big projecting sound, and I don't know if that's, you know, in style these days or whatever, but I always wanted to sound good, whether or not there was a microphone or not. And a lot of those gigs, there wasn't a PA, so it's kind of like Smalls, you know. I guess some guys do use a mic, but um, I don't usually when I play there. So, and it's not about macho or anything like that. It's just about being in the room that you are to be able to project. Because I never was in love with the sound. That got projected through the microphone. Like I was like, man, I'm working on this thing like every day, and now this, you know, $75 microphone is going to put my sound into the room. I mean, a lot of clubs have their stuff together. Like Smoke, they, you know, Paul Stash there, he's into sound. He knows about sound. He records a lot of his own projects for the labels, so he has an idea of how things should sound. So. Um, Hmm. Hearing beeping. Is that on your end or no?
No, I don't hear it.
Oh, okay, cool. That's all right. It's probably outside. But yeah, sound is important. I mean, I'm not super religious with the long tones like I used to be. Um, I don't know. It's funny, man. As you get older, things you mature in your playing, even without maybe practicing like for 6 hours a day like you used to. I mean, there's just something. There's something about how you think about things as you get older. Like things, you know, certain things become more important. It's not about all this technical stuff, which is important, but it's more about what am I saying, you know, like what am I transferring? Like what are people getting from this? I think part of it is just like all the self what I want to say the critiquing we do over the years, whether it be just from putting out records and response you get from that, or just response you get in general from playing, and it's all part of it, you know, and then figuring out what direction you want to go.
So, one of the topics that comes up often on the podcast is just how to make a living as a musician because it can be very difficult. And especially with the advent of the internet and streaming and all these things, you know, there's a lot to think about. The music industry is very DIY at this point. And so, I'd love for you to give some context as to what it was actually like making a living as a musician when you first moved to New York, because a lot of people will kind of romanticize the past, you know, as you kind of alluded to, like, oh, everything was better back in 1985 or whatever the heck people say. But I'd love for you to actually explain, like, do you feel like it was easier to make a living playing gigs?
Um, I don't know, man. I mean, I feel like as the years go by, like I get uh, things are consistent or better, you know, as far as the kind of gigs I get. I think all of that stuff really, it's really on you. Like it's like what you want to get out of it. I I I'm different, man. So I wouldn't recommend my path to a lot of people. You know, I'm kind of like I don't know if you want to say I'm purist or whatever. I didn't do a lot of club dates. Like for me, I'd rather do something else. I worked at a record store for a couple of days a week or early on. I'd rather do that than go play Phil Woods' solo on the Billy Joel tune on somebody's wedding or something. You know what I'm saying? Like to me, it was very sacred and spiritual to do what I wanted to do. It was a choice that I made. Um, I also didn't play in a lot of big bands, which is that was just my concept of how I wanted Mike DiRubbo to be. You know what I'm saying? Like in hindsight, it might have maybe I should have done more of that. I don't know, but I know that what I do well at at a small group setting. That's my thing. My sound, you know what it is. Hopefully, but I think it really depends on you. If there's a lot of quote unquote working musicians, man, that just take every gig that comes along, and there's saxophone's a little different. I think if you play bass or something like that, you could play 2, 3 gigs a day. It seems like I know a lot of cats that do. Um, Saxophone, we got to kind of go out there and find our gigs a little bit more, you know. But I still think I mean, if there's going to be an opportunity to be a musician, it's going to be in New York still, probably more so than a lot of places in the world. Maybe Paris but in the United States, I think you're kind of, we're in the Mecca here still, I believe. But it's tough, man. I mean, you gotta figure it out. Like you gotta find your ways you gotta be smart with your publishing and different things and try to. I'm not super great at the whole self promotion thing and the social media and all that. I just grew up in a different way. You know what I mean? So for me, it seems like bragging sometimes, and it just but I understand it, and I'm coming to terms with it and trying to do it my own way.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always like to advocate for on the podcast is just self-awareness, because there's everyone is going to have their own take on what kind of gigs they want to play and whether or not they are willing to play wedding gigs and
Hmm.
top 40 tunes for like drunk dancing people who are spilling beer on you or whatever it is. And I mean, obviously not every wedding is going to be like that, but there are going to be some like that. And so people just have different opinions on it. Like a lot of people, especially a lot of folks, especially younger folks that have come on the podcast, they just have the attitude, well, hey, I'm playing my instrument, I'm making money,
Yeah.
I'm making a living as a musician, and that's fine with me. But then there's a lot of folks that have a viewpoint that is more similar to yours, which is just like, hey man, I would rather work at a record store or do something else that is enjoyable to me, that I can make money at, rather than kind of I guess maybe you can tell me, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you might feel like you're compromising the music that you want to play or compromising the art form. You might
Hmm.
say like if you go play weddings, is that how you feel?
I mean, I guess so, and like I just want to clarify to anybody listening that does do these gigs, and I'm not, in no way looking down on people that do that because I did it too, and I did it in high school. I was in a wedding band, when I was in high school, getting paid to play, and it's just for me the way that I felt like I didn't want that other influence seeping in to what I do when I do my thing. And I felt like if I'm going to primarily be doing that other stuff, then how can it not sneak in, Like even in college, I played in a couple of different Latin bands, what we used to say back in the day. I mean, really, it was salsa and merengue, right? And I didn't play alto in those bands, man. I played tenor because I didn't want my alto sound to get messed up or something. But that's my own thing, you know. I mean, everybody has their own way, and I'm sure there's a lot of cats that can manage it and just divide their mind that way, and it doesn't really affect them at all. So that's great. And it is every time you got your horn in your hands and you're playing, you're learning. So yeah, I mean, you can still learn on those gigs in a certain way, and that was just my own, you know, maybe it's a little bit being young and or whatever, but that's just the way it turned out for me, you know.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just like self-awareness, figuring out what I don't know, kind of just figuring out what you want your life to look like. I mean, and it evolves over time. I mean,
Sure,
it's
sure.
certainly partially a factor of being young and just wanting to play as much as possible, being super energetic, super eager to just play anything. But
Yep.
hopefully over time, like that kind of balance improves where you do start getting better stuff and stuff that is more in line with the type of music that you would ideally want to play.
For sure, man. And I think whatever you want, you got to put your energy in that direction. So, you know, that's what I was doing, you know. You know, you hear the stories, you know, you want to play with somebody, go learn their music, go hang out with them, go show up to their gigs, that kind of thing, you know. So, you know, I think if you're doing a lot of general business stuff all the time, then maybe that's what you're going to be doing, you know. I don't know. I don't know if the universe works that way. In my mind, it kind of does, but you got to, you got to put your energy into what it is that you want to do. If you want to see the fruits of it, you know.
Yeah, and so another big aspect of your career has just been teaching, whether it be privately or like at the Litchfield Jazz Camp, which I know you've been a part of for some time now. And so I was wondering if you see any kind of differences in students that come to you now versus maybe 10, 15 years ago, just with the advent of streaming and, everything is very, very easy. I feel like, a lot of people say that younger students now are wanting shortcuts. They're wanting to just do everything as quick as possible, and they don't necessarily want to do all of the hard work necessary. Is that something that you've observed, or how have you? What have you noticed about students in recent years, if anything?
I mean, I don't know if I believe all this stuff. Everybody always get down on the young generation and the shortcuts. I mean, but it's just like human, you know. It's just. I'm sure we would have too back in the day. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Everybody wants to get there fast, but that's the thing about playing this music. It's a lifetime thing, and that's one of the things that Jackie told us back in the day that still sticks with me. He said it's a cross country race, man, and that's what it is. You can't be upset about wherever you are in the race at any moment because it's a lifetime thing, man, and I always feel like, and the Litchfield camp, I've been blessed to do it from since '96, I think, from the very first year. Um, and you know, the cats that are serious about it are they're always the same. You know, it doesn't matter. You know, if who it is. I mean, we've had Emmett Cohen come through there. I'm trying to think. Lakeisha Benjamin was there. Even Caroline Davis, who you might know of now, had come there in a while. She was older already, but she came through there. I think Chad Lefkowitz Brown, that's his full name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's come through there too, and apparently he had an audition with me, and I barely remember. I mean, these things happen, you know, once a year, and a year goes by. Sometimes the kids come in and they're this height, and then the next summer they're like this big, and they got a beard, and you don't recognize them. But I think the kids that are serious, the students that are serious, they're always it's the same. It doesn't matter what time it is, if it's the 1980s or if it's 2019. Those kids have been exposed to the music. There's some kind of ability that they had inside of them already. They were exposed to it, and they're listening to the right stuff. They know about the stuff. You know what I mean? As I was about to be profane. Is this a rated R podcast or what is it?
I am the CEO, head executioner, and judge and jury as well, and so I don't personally care.
Okay, okay. But I mean, I was going to say they listen to the right shit, like these kids probably heard all the Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers records. They know the Clifford Brown recordings and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? It's the same. So it's a drag what technology has done to the recording industry in a way. Like, okay, yeah, we could say that back in the day we got one record and we really stayed with that record for a while, right? If I got Speak No Evil, I was with that record for a while, you know what I mean? I didn't have, this is pre-internet, right? So like I said, you either went out and bought it, and maybe if you go out and buy it, maybe you can say that it matters to you a little bit more. It's the same thing like if you pay for your own education, like I did a few years ago and went back and got my master's degree. It was like it's a little bit different, your folks are not helping you and blah, 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 and scholarships. You just take things a little more seriously. Maybe it's the same with music. I don't know. I mean, I Google stuff all the time when I'm looking for a tune too. I'm not gonna, if I just want to hear the melody, what is this melody? I mean, I think it's great that we have all this access, So in that regard, maybe I shouldn't be the one to segue, but I was gonna say about teaching, like, what's more important about studying with a real person, because you could Google all the theoretical shit that you want to know, right? I mean, you could just Google it. Google it. I think it's more important being around a player that you like to be around that kind of sound, like I said, like when I was with Jackie, or being next to George Coleman the other day, and over the years, different opportunities we've had to play, and being with somebody like a Harold Mayburn, knowing what that feels like to have that kind of comping behind you, or a Larry Willis, all this stuff that you can't really put words on to it or quantify it, I think things are so scientific nowadays that people want to quantify everything, man, but you can't. There's some things, I don't know, that are part of the human spirit that, I mean, maybe some people can figure it out, and what it is this, it's that, but I think there's a feeling there, and you kind of can get it when you're around somebody that in that way. You understand what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely a lot to be said for that, and just it can just be very inspiring, and I mean, that's probably the best word, just to get inspired by someone and their energy, for lack of a better word, I guess. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, and so one thing that you touched on is just the recording industry, which has obviously been changed so much by Spotify and Pandora and like all these things, which pay a fraction of a penny, for each play, and so, but a lot of folks that I talk to about this topic, they take the view of, well, it's better for people to just be able to hear the music. And if we look at, people who were making records, especially jazz records, historically, no one really that made really hardly any money off of them in the first place. Was that true in your experience?
I mean, somewhat, although the royalties that you get from even say like the music choice that's on cable TV, like that pays like a decent amount. It's like kind of normal, whatever it is, if it's 10 or 20 cents a stream as opposed to fractions. So it makes a difference. But yeah, things are totally different now with the spot. And at first I was like, I had put out 2 albums on my own label. And I was trying to be defiant and be like, oh, they're not going to get my stuff on Spotify. And then, 5, 6 years go by, and I see my students, that's how they're getting all their information. And then I'm seeing like old records of mine on Spotify, and I'm like, it's almost like if you can't beat them, you got to join them, right? And I'm like, well, if people are going to hear me, and this is the way they're going to hear me, what good is it doing me to be defiant and just put myself like farther under the radar as this underground cat? You know what I mean? We're not going to be here forever. So, just put it out there, man, and have people be able to stream it. I mean, that's my attitude now, that, you know, my stuff is available on Spotify. And if you get lucky and get on one of these playlists that everybody talks about, and I just talked to someone the other day, was talking about a Chet Baker thing that they had released, and it got on one of these playlists, 11.5 million streams, and it actually adds up to like 80 grand or something like that. That's pretty nice, man. You know, if that could happen just for one track. So there is that possibility too. I mean, it might be like playing the lottery, but you know, at least you know it's available. It can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to kind of wrap this up, there's a lot of young musicians that watch the show and listen to the podcast, and I was wondering if you have any particular words of advice for them in terms of how they should go about learning to play the music and stay true to themselves.
Well, one of the things is that's important is to kind of like stay out of your head. Like don't get too into your head too much, and just do the actual work every day of picking up the horn, and try to let yourself go into that moment of practice. It should be something you look forward to, you know, and do it consistently. You know, you have to do it consistently, but don't overthink things, and don't expect results too quickly. Just pursue it every day. Like what's the movie Jiro Dreams of Sushi? Have you seen that one?
I have not.
Okay. It's about this sushi chef, man, and he just does the same thing every day, and he just wants to do it a little bit better. It's really, you know, it's a really good lesson in life, man. I mean, but there's so much available now that I would say to the younger audience, or people just starting out, is to just try to pick something, try to find a sound you like, try to find a direction in the music that you are into. It's okay if you're not into everything or you don't understand everything in the beginning. Just pick something and stick with it for a while, and really put a focus on it, and try not to spread yourself too thin.
Well said. Hey, Mike, where's the best place for people to find you?
Oh man, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, Mike DiRubbo. My website is a good place to see where I'm playing, and I have my recent recordings up there, a little place to listen to things and little videos. So, yeah.
Cool, man. And I are all your albums out on streaming platforms now? Is that correct? Most of them?
I think they should be. Like, I don't know. They should be. I don't know if they all pop up always, but they should be. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I always suggest people, you know, go check them out on a streaming platform. But if you enjoy it, then just go to your website or wherever you're selling, you know, copies, or hit you up personally. I'm sure you know be happy to help someone out. And just buy a copy.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, hey, man, this is awesome. I'm grateful for your time.
Well, thank you, Bernie. I appreciate it very much, man.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. This was super fun, and just stay on the line for 1 sec, but thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you happen to be listening to this, and if you enjoyed the podcast, consider giving it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, please visit berniesbootlegs.com. Thanks again, and see you guys next time.